Hello, you're watching Outsiders and me, James Morrow, live from the U.S.-Mexico border, joined as always with my colleagues back in Sydney, Rowan, Rio Grande Dean, and Rita Border Patrol Panahi. And in a moment, I'm going to explain the Democrats' Plan B, otherwise known as undermining democracy in order to save democracy in the event too many voters next week cast their votes for Donald Trump. But before we get to that, I've got some more breaking news about Kamala Harris and how far she will go to pander to the Latino vote. And you know, I didn't even believe this. You're not going to believe this either. So we all know Kamala has been slipping in the polls with Latino voters. What else is new? But check this out. What you're seeing on your screen is a Kamala Harris rally in Arizona from just a couple of nights ago featuring the Mexican band Los Tigres del Norte, which all sounds perfectly fine until you realize that Los Tigres del Norte is a band that is most famous for singing what are known as Narcos Corridors, or ballads that celebrate the lives and careers of drug smugglers and drug cartel kingpin, like the hit that got them started, a song called Jefe del Jefes, or Chief of Chiefs, which celebrates the life and exploits of one Miguel Angel Felix Gallardo. Now, who was he, you may ask? Gallardo was a Mexican drug kingpin known as the boss of bosses, the Jefe del Jefes, and one of the founders of the violent Guadalajara cartel, which controlled much of the drug trafficking in Mexico and the corridors along the Mexico-United States border in the 1980s. Now, Gallardo's career came to an end when he was sentenced to 40 years in a federal prison here in the United States after he was involved in the kidnapping, torture, and murder of Enrique Quique Camarena Salazar, who himself was a Mexican-American DEA agent. Pretty shocking stuff, and I don't know about you, but to me, I think that using a band that glorifies the killers and drug dealers and murderers seems like an odd flex for anyone who is running to be president, to say nothing of someone like Kamala Harris, who, for whatever reason, is running on her fairly shoddy record as a prosecutor to claim that she'd be a tough-on-crime chief executive. And you know what? It's not just me who thinks that. In fact, their songs glorifying drug traffickers are so offensive that they have been banned from being played in Mexico City on order of the local government. But at a Kamala rally, well, I gotta say, if they patronizingly think that associating Latinos with drug smugglers is going to win them a vote, well, that's pretty bizarre to me. Personally, I think Hispanic voters are a little cluier than this and won't be bought quite so easily. In fact, I think a lot of them would find that pretty offensive. Anyway, let's move on to this other point, Plan B, because it is only a few days until the polls close here in the United States, and then it'll be probably a few more days before the cutoff for some states to stop receiving and counting their mail-in ballots without postmarks. And then, who knows, we might, sometime in the days after that, have an answer to the question on everybody's lips: who is going to be inaugurated the next president of the United States? But then again, we might not have that answer, because one thing we do know is that if there is any dispute, this whole thing, this whole election could wind up in the Supreme Court, as happened in the 2000 election, when the entire issue of whether George W.M.D.'s Bush or Al Inconvenient Truth Gore would be president literally hung on the issue of what were known as hanging chads. Now, to me, I say why the U.S. can't simply follow the Australian system of paper ballots counted on the night with an added layer of voter ID check. Well, that's beyond me, but again, that's another story. What I do think the real story is, though, and one which too many people are ignoring, is how the Democrats are going to act if it looks like Donald Trump is going to cross the magic threshold of 270 electoral votes in the hours, days, or even weeks after the election. Now, this is serious because they've already made their intentions really clear here. Quite simply, it's not the Republicans you necessarily need to worry about questioning elections or undermining democracy, which are the phrases they love to use. No. Instead, It's the Democrats. And if you listen, they're telling us loud and clear what they intend to do. What's going to happen here is a multi-step plan, and it is already underway now. Step one, of course, is to create the conditions where a large number of Americans believe that Donald Trump is a fascist, a Nazi, and yes, a threat to democracy. And in doing so, delegitimize any Trump win. This is what Kamala Harris and Tim Walz have been saying by way of a closing argument in the campaign.
From John Kelly's words that Donald Trump is someone who, I quote, certainly falls into the general definition of fascist, who in fact vowed to be a dictator on day one and vowed to use the military as his personal militia to carry out his personal and political vendettas.
Do you think Donald Trump is a fascist?
Yes, I do. Yes, I do.
Donald Trump's got this big rally going at Madison Square Garden. There's a direct parallel to a big rally that happened in the mid-1930s at Madison Square Garden. And don't think that he doesn't know for 1 second exactly what they're doing.
The fascists depend on fear. The fascists depend on us going back. But we're not afraid of weird people. No. We're a little bit creeped out, but we're not afraid.
Oh, we are a little creeped out by the weirdness too, Timmy, let me tell you. But, of course, like a flock of birds or maybe lemmings, picking up the scent and quickly changing direction in formation, the media took up the call, pumping this idea that somehow Trump is threatening freedom. When, of course, the left has made no bones about what they want to do to things like freedom of speech and freedom of thought. The idea here is to whip up enough people, not necessarily a majority, but an active minority, into a frenzy that if Donald Trump takes the White House or retakes it, then that will be the end of democracy, the end of America as we know it. Democrats are already privately admitting this. This week, Reuters reported that, quote, 6 Democratic Party and Harris campaign officials said the initial fight against any early Trump victory claim would take place in the court of public opinion. They plan to flood social media and television airways with demands that all votes be counted before victories are declared, unquote. Now, the idea here, of course, is to create enough chaos and doubt and uncertainty to get to the next step, which is to leverage this into a delay of the certification of the election and the creation of a case to take to the Supreme Court. Because, remember, it's only questioning election if the Republicans do it, not the Democrats. But here's the thing. The only way this is going to work is if you get to step 3, which is finally activate the mob. And while you can talk all you want about January 6th, and that was bad, remember, the left has form. I mean, remember how the leftist activist movements Antifa and Black Lives Matter sowed chaos all through America, burning down main streets and suburbs, supposedly to protest police brutality, but in reality to create further chaos for the Trump administration. Tim Walz, who was governor of Minnesota at the time, famously let rioters burn the capital city of his state. And Kamala Harris, the woman who will be installed in the White House if the Democrats get their way, she urged people to give money to bail funds for the rioters. And it's not just that. The left is also incredibly skilled at putting pressure on the courts, particularly the Supreme Court, if it doesn't bend to their will. This is why the left is so keen to pack the Supreme Court with its own justices so that it becomes a rubber stamp for their agenda. And again, you'll recall we've been here before. In 2018, protesters tried to storm the Supreme Court over the nomination of Justice Brett Kavanaugh. And later, Senate Minority Leader, Democrat Chuck Schumer, appeared to threaten Supreme Court justices over their potential ruling on Roe v. Wade. Some people took this literally, including one man who was arrested outside Brett Kavanaugh's home with tools and weapons authorities say he was going to use to kidnap and perhaps kill the justice over his stance on that historic case. Now again, it seems now like preparations are again being made to do similar sorts of things, The New York Times, in barely coded language, raised this possibility a few days ago, saying that there would have to be a societal mobilization against Trump if he wins. Maryland Congressman Jamie Raskin, he let the cat out of the bag even more so as to what should happen if Trump wins, a Supreme Court challenge to his victory fails, and the Republican winds up being slated to be inaugurated the next president of the United States in January.
So it's going to be up to us on January 6, 2025, to tell the rampaging Trump mobs that he's disqualified. And then we need bodyguards for everybody in Civil War conditions, all because the 9 justices, not all of them, but these justices who have not many cases to look at every year, not that much work to do, a huge staff, great protection, simply do not want to do their job and interpret what the great 14th Amendment means. And I'm glad that Sherilyn's creating her new center so we can bring that back to life, even as we're continuing to amend the Constitution, as Professor Hassan has invited us to do.
Extraordinary. Did you hear that? Were you listening? Bring out the mobs, bring out the Civil War conditions. Sorry, folks, you voted, but we have to end democracy to save democracy. That's the Democrat way. I really hope we don't get there, but as they say, forewarned is forearmed.